All right, let's just jump right in. We spend basically our entire lives trying to get away from pain, right? We want to fix our weaknesses, find comfort, but what if I told you that whole approach is backwards? What if the very things you're trying to get rid of are actually the source code for your greatest strengths?
So this whole idea really gets its start with the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who wrote this pretty intense line. And he wasn't just being poetic, he meant it. He believed that to truly transform, to rise again, you first have to go through the fire. You have to become ashes. And that right there, that's the big question we're tackling today. What if we've been looking at all our struggles, our anxieties, our pain completely wrong? What if they're not bugs in the system to be fixed, but clues, puzzles that point to some kind of hidden power? Well, let's dig in and find out.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this kind of backwards idea, we've got to start with Nietzsche's own story. Because for him, this wasn't some philosophy cooked up in an armchair. No, this was forged in the fire of his own experience.
So get this, in 1879, Nietzsche's only 35 years old, and his health just completely collapses. We're talking crippling migraines, he could barely see. I mean, by all accounts, his career was over, a total failure. But for the next decade, he does something completely radical. Instead of trying to cure his pain, he decides to study it. He turned his own suffering into a laboratory. And the ideas that came out of that dark period, man, they didn't just change his life. They went on to become a cornerstone of modern psychology. Now you might be thinking, okay, great for some 19th century philosopher, but what about the rest of us? Well, that's the kicker. It turns out Nietzsche hadn't just discovered something about himself. He had stumbled onto a universal pattern, one that shows up absolutely everywhere, from your muscles to the stock market. Let's bring this down to earth with an example we all kind of get, going to the gym. When you're lifting weights, what are you really doing? You're literally and intentionally damaging your body. The stress from the weight creates these teeny tiny microscopic tears in your muscle fibers. Now, your body's response to this is amazing. There's a scientific name for it, hypertrophy. And it doesn't just patch up the tears like a Band-Aid. Nope, it rebuilds the muscle fibers to be even thicker and stronger than they were before. And this is the key takeaway here. The strength doesn't come despite the stress, it comes because of it. It's simple, right? No stress, no growth.
Okay, so that's our bodies. They literally get stronger from being broken down a little. But what about our minds? Does the same rule apply? Well, it turns out, yeah, it does, just in a slightly different way. Let's look at psychology. Behavioral economists have proven over and over again that we are way more motivated by avoiding pain than we are by seeking pleasure. The fear of losing something is a much, much more powerful driver than the hope of gaining that exact same thing.
Just look at this. The psychological sting you feel from losing $100 is roughly twice as intense as the pleasure you'd get from finding that same $100. And this isn't a bug in our programming, it's an evolutionary feature. Our ancestors who were super paranoid about every little threat were the ones who survived to pass on their genes. So our brains, just like our muscles, are fundamentally wired to respond powerfully to negative pressure. Pain, it seems, is the default driver of action. So we've got muscle growth from physical stress over here, and we've got psychological motivation from avoiding pain over there. These might seem like totally unrelated quirks of being human, right? But they're not. They're actually two different examples of a single unifying idea. And for our purposes, we're going to call it the metabolic theory. Think of it just like your body's metabolism. You take in food, which is a stress on your system, and your body breaks it down, converting it into energy. Well, this theory suggests we can do the exact same thing with emotional and psychological stress. Here's how it works. First, you have to acknowledge that stress, disorder, suffering, that's the baseline. It's not a personal failure. Second, you have to identify the natural mechanism that already exists inside you to process that stress. And third, instead of running away from the stress, you learn to lean in and engage with that mechanism on purpose. Honestly, if you remember just one thing from this whole explainer, make it this sentence. From our muscles, to our minds, to entire societies, healthy, complex systems don't get stronger by avoiding stress. They get stronger by developing the capacity to metabolize it, to break it down and turn it into fuel for growth.
This all sounds great in theory, I know. Metabolize your pain. But what does that actually look like in real life? How do you actually use your suffering without just, falling into toxic positivity, or on the flip side, getting completely crushed by it?
The key, it turns out, is all about the dosage. It's just like in the gym. Zone 1 is too little stress. If you only lift tiny weights, you don't get stronger. You actually get more fragile. Zone 3 is way too much stress. You try to lift something too heavy and you break down, you get injured. The sweet spot, the magic, is in Zone 2. That's the optimal, manageable level of stress that pushes you just enough to trigger real growth.
So, for any kind of suffering to actually be productive, you need 3 conditions. 1, you have to accept that struggle is normal. It's not a sign you did something wrong. 2, you have to be sure the stress you're facing is in that Zone 2 growth zone and not the Zone 3 breakdown zone. And finally, and this might be the hardest part, you have to actively engage with the pain. Treat it like it's valuable information, not an error message.
And this leads to a really profound shift in how you see things. We usually ask, how do I fix this? Or how do I make this pain go away? But try asking a different question, one that author Tim Ferriss talks about. How does this serve me? What is my anxiety trying to protect me from? What is my frustration showing me about what I really truly value? A question like that turns suffering from a bug into a feature.
And when you really start to adopt this metabolic mindset, it doesn't just change things inside your head, it starts to change how you interact with the world in very real, very practical ways.
I mean, think about it. In parenting, it means you stop trying to shield your kids from every little difficulty. Instead, you let them face small, manageable, Zone 2 challenges so they can build their own resilience. In a company, it means you build in controlled stressors, like having a designated devil's advocate in meetings, to make the whole organization stronger. And for your own mental health, the goal shifts. It's not about trying to eliminate all pain anymore. It's about building your capacity to process it productively.
So often, when we face a hardship, our first instinct is to ask that question of cosmic injustice. Why me? Why did this have to happen? But this whole framework suggests that might be completely the wrong question to be asking. The more powerful, more useful question is this one. What can this become? See, that question doesn't deny the pain. It acknowledges it, but it refuses to let the pain be the end of the story. It sees every struggle, every failure, every ounce of suffering, not as an endpoint, but as the raw material for whatever comes next. So the question I'll leave you with is, what will you build with it?